The CEO was surrounded by his highest-paid engineers when the system crashed, but it was the cleaning lady's 10-year-old son who quietly walked in and solved the problem nobody else could. It wasn't even 5 minutes to showtime when everything went to hell. Inside Halcyon Metric's glass-walled control room in Tempe, Arizona, the mood had been tense but confident. People moved with purpose, screens blinked with glowing dashboards, and tech leads murmured over headset mics. CEO Renwick Dorsey stood in the center of it all, arms folded, watching with that cold, calculating stare he was famous for. This launch had to go perfectly. The investors were watching live from 2 countries. Reporters were in the hallway lining up for their tech previews. City council members had been invited as a PR gesture. They were already sipping catered coffee and staring through the glass like kids at an aquarium. The product was a cloud infrastructure manager called Nimbus Core. It was supposed to be Halcyon's future, the platform that would take them from promising disruptor to household name. Millions had gone into development, billboards, training events. 2 acquisition deals had already been floated just based on the beta. And then, with 3 minutes and 14 seconds to launch, it happened. Every screen stuttered, then black. The giant 4K wall monitor let out a faint pop. The lights didn't flicker, but the air felt charged, like a wire had snapped somewhere behind the walls. Renwick didn't move at first. He just kept staring. "Are we doing a controlled reboot?" he asked, his voice almost too calm. No one answered. He turned. "Is this a simulation?" "No, sir," someone muttered. "This is real." The hum of the air conditioning and distant voices from the press area became suddenly loud in the silence. A young systems engineer, Lars Petrov, bent toward his terminal. "I think it's the cache servers. They've all gone into recursive boot, but the failover didn't kick in." "What do you mean it didn't kick in?" Renwick snapped. "It's automated. That's what we paid for. That's what you swore would work." Lars stammered something, eyes wide. Senior developer Kendra Silas leaned in with him, scrolling like her fingers were trying to dig answers out of the screen. "It's not just the cache. The load balancers are glitching too. This doesn't make sense." "It's not the hardware," said someone in the back. "We did full diagnostics at 6 this morning." Renwick walked toward the screen like he could force it to reboot by presence alone. "Get the backup node up," he barked. "Trying," Lars said, typing faster now. "But the watchdog timer isn't releasing control." A tech on the left cursed under his breath. Another opened Slack and started typing to a remote team. "This can't be happening," someone whispered. But it was. On the other side of the glass, the city councilwoman from Mesa was raising an eyebrow. A tech reporter had started filming on her phone. Renwick turned back to his team. "You've got 90 seconds, or we're pulling the launch." "Sir," Kendra started to say, but he held up a hand. His knuckles were pale. The only time anyone had seen Renwick's temper break was back in 2017 when a funding round fell through. That had ended in 3 terminations, a lawsuit, and a lot of NDAs. This time felt worse. "Restart the core, kill everything except security protocols," Kendra said urgently. "It might buy us just enough time to clear the stack and push through on raw input." But even as she said it, everyone knew. They were improvising, guessing, throwing ideas at a digital wall and praying something would stick. And out in the hallway, the mood was shifting. People noticed the nervous glances, the blackout screens, the raised voices. One journalist mouthed, "Is something wrong?" But around the corner, a quiet pair of sneakers and a lunchbox were making their way toward the storm. Odessa Brinkley was on her knees refilling the paper towel dispenser in the second-floor restroom. Her back ached more than usual. Maybe it was the new mop heads. They always bought the cheapest kind. Or maybe it was just one of those days. She didn't mind cleaning. Not really. She'd been doing it for most of her adult life, ever since she left the small town of Artesia, New Mexico, with a suitcase, a bus ticket, and her son still in her belly. Odessa was fast, methodical, invisible in the way most people expect custodians to be. She learned to glide around the edges, pick up what others left behind, and disappear before anyone noticed she'd been there. Except today, she wasn't alone. Her 10-year-old son, Truett, was sitting cross-legged on a plastic chair just outside the staff lounge, a half-eaten orange in one hand and his beat-up old tablet in the other. The screen flickered slightly where the corner had cracked, but Truett had rigged the settings to keep the pixels running. He'd learned how to rewire the power adapter himself. Odessa poked her head out. "You okay, baby?" Truett didn't look up. "Yeah, I'm almost done rewriting the packet parser. The last one was dropping fragments." She smiled softly. She didn't understand half the things that came out of his mouth, but she knew when he was happy. This was his version of play. Other kids built Lego towers. Truett debugged test environments. "You want the second orange?" she asked. He shook his head without looking away. "Too much sugar." She chuckled under her breath. "You sound like an old man." "Nah," he said. "Old men still think Ethernet's faster than Wi-Fi." That made her laugh. They didn't have much. Odessa worked 2 shifts, and the rent on their small apartment near Apache Boulevard ate up most of her check. But they were all right. Truett got straight A's, except in PE. He hated running, said it was inefficient movement. Most days she left him with her sister, but today the school had closed early after a burst pipe. Her sister couldn't take him, so Odessa had told her supervisor the truth. Either Truett came with her, or she'd have to miss the shift. She'd expected pushback, but the building manager waved it off. "As long as he doesn't break anything," he'd said. So here they were. The company upstairs was doing something big today, something technical. Odessa didn't know exactly what. She'd seen the signs on the elevator, Halcyon Metrics product launch. Fancy posters, men in ties with keycards, women in heels and badge clips. All that stuff felt like another world. A loud voice echoed from the hallway. Odessa glanced over. Something was happening. Truett's head tilted slightly. He'd caught the change too. They both heard the shift. The urgent footsteps, the clipped voices, that tense energy buildings get when something's gone wrong. He set the orange peel down on a napkin and stood. Odessa raised a brow. "Don't go bothering anybody." "I'm just curious," he said. Curiosity gets kids in trouble. But she didn't stop him. She watched him walk away, backpack still slung over one shoulder, his tablet tucked under his arm like it was a piece of him. Truett didn't fidget or drag his feet. He walked with that quiet, focused rhythm he always had when he was thinking, like his feet were just following his brain around. She looked back at the paper towel dispenser, then back toward the hallway where he'd vanished. "Lord," she muttered to herself, "please don't let this boy embarrass me." What Odessa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her son wasn't heading toward trouble. He was heading straight into the center of a breakdown no one in that building knew how to fix. And he had ideas. But when Truett walked through those glass doors, no one was looking at him yet. Not yet. Truett stepped quietly into the hallway leading to Halcyon's main control room, eyes scanning everything. He didn't know all the job titles or what half the blinking lights meant, but he could feel something wasn't right. You didn't need credentials to read panic. He saw it in the pacing, in the way people clutched their phones, in the sheer silence of a room that should have been alive with confidence. He slipped closer, keeping to the edge of the corridor. His sneakers were soft-soled, the kind with the peeling outer edge that caught on things. But today, they made no noise. From where he stood just outside the doorway, Truett had a clear view into the glass-walled control center. A dozen or so people in lanyards were locked onto their screens, their mouths moving but nothing landing. Some were typing, others just stood with that frozen look adults get when they realize they don't know what to do. Then Truett spotted the man at the center of it all, tall, suited, with a jaw that looked like it hadn't smiled in a while. He was barking something at a younger guy hunched over a laptop. That had to be Renwick Dorsey. Truett's fingers tightened on his tablet. He recognized a few of the programs open on the screens, same interfaces he'd messed with when he taught himself to build mock servers last summer. They were using a multi-instance stack routing protocol. Looked like a high-speed failover model. He squinted at the log scrolling by on the screen closest to him. Yep, something was definitely looping. He stepped a little closer, just enough for the sliding door sensor to click. No one turned. They were too wrapped up in their own mess to notice a small kid standing barefoot close to a crisis. "Hey," Truett said quietly, aiming it at the woman with the big glasses near the second monitor bank. "I think your load balancer isn't releasing memory fast enough. It's overloading the watchdog process." She looked over, blinking like she didn't register what she was seeing. "What?" "Your watchdog timer's in conflict with the last cached snapshot. It's stuck in the same loop. You're just stacking instances of the same corrupted data." A guy at the back half laughed. "What? Who are you? Whose kid is this?" Truett didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the diagnostic logs. "Right there," he said. See the error code? Segfault 2048. That's a memory access violation from a redundant call. Two engineers glanced toward the screen. One of them, Kendra Silas, moved closer. Her eyebrows started to draw in just slightly. "Wait a second," she said. "He's not wrong." "Come on," said the guy who'd laughed. "He's a kid. That's probably just a guess." "Yeah, well, that guess might be better than anything we've said in the last 5 minutes," Kendra replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. Truett stepped forward and held up his tablet. "I've been building mock versions of cloud systems on this," he said. "You're using a modular kernel with dynamic instancing, right?" A heavy pause. Renwick turned sharply as if finally realizing the room was reacting to something he hadn't caught. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "Who brought a kid in here?" Kendra raised her hand slightly. "He just pointed out a memory conflict in our core process. I think he might have found the bottleneck." Renwick narrowed his eyes. "You're telling me the room full of engineers I pay 6 figures to couldn't solve this, and a 10-year-old just walked in off the floor with the answer?" Truett didn't flinch. "I didn't say I had the answer. I said I saw the error. There's a difference." The room went quiet again. Then Lars, the systems guy, started typing. He replicated the error on his console. Error logs matched. Truett's call was accurate. Kendra glanced up. "What's your name?" "Truett Brinkley." Renwick looked past him toward the glass door, and just outside it, Odessa stood, frozen, holding a trash liner in one hand, her face a mix of horror and something else, something caught between fear and disbelief. But no one asked her to leave. Not yet. Something was shifting, and Truett hadn't even touched a keyboard. The tension inside that control room didn't break. It twisted. Renwick didn't like being caught off guard. You could see it in the way his lip curled slightly before he spoke, like the idea of being outsmarted by someone he hadn't vetted offended him personally. "All right," he said slowly. "If you're so sure about this loop, tell us what we do next." Truett shifted the tablet under his arm and stepped toward the nearest console. He didn't touch anything, just looked. "You need to bypass the watchdog," he said, calm as if he were answering a question in class. "Not kill it. Just isolate the trigger so it stops cycling the corrupted node." Kendra stood beside him, her fingers already typing. "You're saying we need to force the system to skip the snapshot?" Truett nodded. "Yeah, and then hard purge the cache index. If you try to relaunch without that, it'll just trip again. That's why your failover didn't work." Lars leaned in, trying to keep up. "That'll clear the load balancers." "It should," Truett said. "You're bleeding memory across 2 linked nodes. Neither of them can complete the handshake because they're getting identical error feedback." Kendra's eyes widened slightly. "That's why the watchdog kept triggering. It thought the system was still in pre-init." Renwick still wasn't convinced. His voice lowered. "You realize if this goes wrong, we tank a launch that's already on the edge." Truett looked up at him, face steady. "I know, but if you do nothing, it's already tanked." Kendra didn't wait. "Back up the root instance," she called to Lars. "Manual override, let's isolate the kernel, and run a soft wipe on the local cache." Someone on the side muttered, "Are we seriously letting a kid run our launch now?" "No one's letting anyone do anything," Kendra snapped. "We're out of time. We've tried everything else." The room came alive again, but this time with precision. Energy returned, not panicked, but focused. There was no music, no clapping, no motivational speech, just fingers moving across keys, code flying across screens, and technicians barking status checks. Odessa stood frozen just outside the room, hands still clenched around that trash bag, like it anchored her to something. She could hear every word, and she couldn't move. Someone finally opened the door, and she took a cautious step inside. No one asked her to leave. That was new. On the screens, the new instance loaded. Kendra ran a system integrity test, then another. The logs were clean. "Connection stabilized," Lars confirmed. Renwick blinked. "Backup node online," Lars said. "System-wide latency dropped by 60%. She's holding." A beat of silence followed, and then the main console lit up. The launch sequence came back online. The wall monitor blinked into full display, and the UI flowed like nothing had ever gone wrong. The press didn't even know anything had happened. Kendra turned to Truett, stunned. "How did you even know where to look?" He shrugged. I saw the same glitch during a simulation I made. Took me 3 weeks to figure it out. Thought it looked familiar. Renwick was still trying to process what just happened. His eyes flicked between the team, the screens, and this quiet kid who just diffused a live corporate disaster with a secondhand tablet and a juice-stained t-shirt. The room was still. No one quite knew what to say. That's when Odessa stepped forward, voice trembling. "That's my son." Everyone turned. She didn't smile, didn't boast, just said it like a fact, like something too obvious to need explanation, and no one spoke for a moment, because what could they say? But Renwick didn't thank him. Not yet. He just stared, like he was still trying to calculate what Truett had cost him, or what he might be worth. There was something surreal about the way everyone stood still after the system came back. Not frozen, not stunned, just quiet, like they were afraid to move too fast and somehow break the magic. The screens were glowing again, metrics streaming in real time. The launch portal was active, clients were logging in. And out in the hallway, the crowd of press and VIPs remained blissfully unaware that the company had nearly flatlined. Renwick Dorsey didn't move right away. He kept looking at Truett like the boy was a math problem he couldn't solve. "Start the launch feed," he finally said, voice clipped. "Go live in 30 seconds. Kendra gave a curt nod and turned back to her screen. "Lars, you're green across nodes. Fully restored. Nothing's hanging. Backup protocols stable," Lars said, still sounding surprised. Odessa stood just inside the threshold, not sure if she was supposed to be there. No one had asked her to leave, but no one had invited her in either. "Ma'am?" Someone called softly from behind her. She turned. It was a middle-aged woman in a visitor's badge, nicely dressed, clipboard in hand. Probably someone from PR. "I'm sorry, you can't be back here. This is a restricted—" Renwick waved a hand without looking. "She stays." That silenced the room faster than the crash had. Odessa blinked. She didn't ask questions, just stepped quietly to the side and folded her arms across her chest, as if making herself smaller might somehow protect her son from the eyes burning into him. Truett stayed close to Kendra, who was already checking the live feedback from the platform's first login traffic. "We're getting in-system confirmations," she said. "Clients are accessing dashboards. Load times are stable." Renwick finally exhaled, but it sounded more like frustration than relief. "We need to monitor the entire sequence. Next 2 hours minimum," he said. Then he turned slowly to Truett. "How did you know that fix would work?" Truett shifted on his feet. "Didn't know. I saw the pattern in your log. It looked like a corrupted load loop I ran into a few months ago, but you had more traffic, so your failover was just making it worse." Renwick blinked. "You ran into it where?" "My own project. I made a copy of this infrastructure layout last summer. I wanted to see if I could build a test environment." "With what hardware?" Truett lifted his tablet. "Just this, and an old ThinkPad my aunt gave me." Someone muttered, "You're kidding." But Truett wasn't smiling. Renwick rubbed his jaw, then glanced at Odessa. "You trained him?" She scoffed lightly, folding her arms tighter. "No, sir. He trained himself." Silence again. But this time it felt different, like everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. One of the board members stepped into the room, having just heard the commotion outside. Merrick Langdon, an older man in a navy wool blazer and a permanent squint. He looked between Renwick and the monitors. "What the hell happened?" "Temporary glitch," Renwick said smoothly. "Resolved now." Langdon turned to Kendra, suspicious. "That true?" She hesitated, then pointed to Truett. "He resolved it." Langdon's gaze dropped to the boy. His face twitched, like he couldn't quite compute what he was seeing. "I'm sorry," Langdon said slowly. "Who is this?" Odessa cleared her throat. "He's my son, Truett Brinkley." Langdon looked at her, then back at the screen. "We need to talk about this," he said quietly to Renwick. "No," Kendra interrupted. "We don't talk about it. You all need to understand what just happened. We were seconds away from a catastrophic loss. He saved you." Langdon didn't reply, just frowned and stepped back toward the hallway. Renwick glanced at Truett again, then leaned down slightly. "You ever think about working in tech?" he asked, voice low. "I'm 10, Truett replied. Renwick straightened. "You'd better start thinking." Truett didn't answer. He looked back at his mom, like maybe this had gone too far. Odessa gave a small nod, not to encourage, just to let him know she was still there. But outside that room, word was already spreading. Someone had saved the day. and it wasn't anybody on the payroll. 15 minutes after the crisis passed, the tone inside Halcyon's control room was still off balance. The launch was live, yes. Clients were logging in, dashboards humming, data flowing like it was always supposed to. But the temperature had changed. Subtle, awkward, uncertain. Renwick stood at the far end of the room, back to the glass wall, arms folded again. That stance he used when he was recalculating everything in his head. Power, risk, money. He measured people like data points. Kendra Silas sat with one hand on her mouse, but she wasn't moving it. She kept glancing at Truett, still standing nearby, still clutching his tablet. He hadn't said a word since the system stabilized. Most of the engineers avoided eye contact, not out of spite, but because none of them knew how to explain what just happened. Truett didn't belong here. That was obvious. He wasn't even tall enough to reach the main workstation without a step stool, but he saw things they didn't. And worse, he understood them. Renwick finally spoke. I want logs from every instance during the crash. I want code comparisons from 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after. And I want a memo drafted right now that explains how this happened. No one moved. Am I unclear? No, sir, Kendra replied quietly, and the others scattered to follow. Odessa stood still. She didn't want to move. Didn't know what came next. Ms. Brinkley, Renwick said, looking at her for the first time since the system came back. I assume you understand the nature of what your son just did. She raised an eyebrow. You mean saving your launch? A faint twitch in his jaw. Yes, I do. And I assume you understand why that complicates things. She frowned. What's complicated? He helped. He didn't break anything. He didn't touch your property. He gave a suggestion that worked. Renwick didn't like being cornered, especially not by a janitor. That was clear in the silence that followed. Langdon had returned, now standing in the doorway with two other board members, the kind of people who wore $800 shoes and talked about grit like it was a flavor of coffee. One of them stepped forward, a woman in a sharp pinstripe suit, Verna Cully. Odessa had seen her name on a placard earlier while vacuuming the executive suite. We'd like to speak to your son privately, she said, gently but firmly. Odessa stepped in front of Truett without hesitation. That's not happening. I assure you, it's not. You can assure me all day long, Odessa said, voice calm but solid. But he's 10. You want to talk to him, you talk to me first. I'm not about to hand my son off to a room full of executives like he's a conference topic. The silence that followed was heavy. Verna didn't push back, but her eyes darted to Renwick, waiting for him to handle it. He didn't, because he couldn't. Not without looking like the villain in a story that might already be halfway to the internet. Truett stepped forward on his own. You can ask me something now, if you want. Verna blinked. All right. Do you understand what it is you fixed today? Yes, he said. You had a system recursion error caused by a corrupted cached snapshot. Your load balancers were failing because the watchdog was stuck reinitializing the same instance. Your engineers couldn't fix it because they weren't looking at the root trigger. They were just rebooting the surface. Another silence. This one deeper. Verna looked at Renwick. He's not wrong. Renwick was still unreadable. You want to offer him something? Odessa asked. Say it now. We're considering a scholarship, some kind of early track for advanced placement, once we vet his situation, Verna said. Vet? Odessa repeated. What does that mean? Standard process. We'd want to evaluate his educational background, environment, support system. You mean check if we're the kind of poor you can be proud of, Odessa said. Not angry, just honest. Kendra turned in her seat. You don't need to evaluate anything. He just did something none of us could. That should be enough. But Renwick was already thinking 2 moves ahead, and Odessa knew it. This wasn't over. This was only the start. The launch was officially declared a success by the time the sun dipped behind the dusty orange skyline of Tempe. From the outside, everything looked smooth, polished, predictable, a rising tech company hitting its mark. But inside Halcyon Metrics, the energy had shifted, not just from the earlier crisis, but from what that crisis revealed. Most of the team stayed late, not because they had to, but because no one wanted to be the first to leave. There were too many conversations happening in corners, too many glances cast toward the small figure now sitting beside his mother in a back office, legs swinging above the floor, tablet on his lap. Truett wasn't saying much. He'd answered a few questions, talked about packet transfers, said no thank you to a muffin someone offered, and now he was quiet, as if fixing a multi-million-dollar crash had drained him the same way PE did at school. Odessa sat beside him, holding his hand in her lap. She hadn't said anything in a while either. Renwick Dorsey stood in a glassed-in corner conference room, eyes on the hallway where they sat. He wasn't alone. Langdon and Verna flanked him. Another board member, Kurt Dilbeck, leaned on the table, chewing on the tip of a pen. They weren't talking about the crash anymore. They were talking about the optics. If word gets out a janitor's kid saved the launch, we look incompetent, Kurt said flatly. You were incompetent, Kendra muttered from the doorway. She hadn't meant to speak, but the words were out. Everyone turned. Excuse me? Kurt asked, annoyed. You were, she said again. Every one of us missed the error. Every script failed. I don't care if the kid came from the mailroom. He fixed it. Verna held up a hand. That's not the point, Kendra. No, it is the point, Kendra shot back. You're trying to manage perception. I get it. But maybe, just maybe, it's time you stop pretending genius only shows up in a tailored blazer. Langdon didn't answer. Renwick didn't either. Not because they agreed, but because they weren't sure how to argue with that without proving her right. In the hallway, Truett looked up at his mom. Did I do something wrong? She squeezed his hand. No, baby. You did everything right. They just don't know what to do with that. A few moments later, Renwick stepped out of the conference room and walked over to them. Alone this time. No entourage. Odessa stood when he approached. I'd like to talk, he said. We're listening, she replied. He cleared his throat. We're considering something more long-term for Truett. Not just a scholarship, something designed to cultivate young technical minds. Exposure to real projects. Early training. If he's interested. Odessa didn't speak right away. What do you call it when a boy like mine does what yours couldn't? She asked. Renwick blinked. Excuse me? You all spend millions on programs, recruiting, consultants, and today, a 10-year-old from a second-floor lounge did more in 5 minutes than half your team. So if you're offering him something, just say it plain. He nodded once. A mentorship, direct access to our development labs, structured sessions with our lead engineers, and eventually early career placement. He'd be part of something real. Truett finally spoke. Can I still do my own stuff? What do you mean? Renwick asked. I don't want to stop building my own projects. I like working on my tablet. I like making things that aren't just company things. Renwick hesitated but nodded. You'd have freedom and guidance. Odessa looked at her son. He looked up at her. A silent exchange. You can say no, she reminded him. Truett turned to Renwick. Can I think about it? Another pause. Yes, Renwick said. You can. But just down the hall, someone from the PR team was already drafting headlines, ones that would erase the parts that made people uncomfortable. The next morning, Odessa woke to 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and 1 email from an address she didn't recognize, media inquiries, HR follow-ups, and something labeled Immediate Opportunity, Internal Talent Discovery Initiative. She rubbed her eyes, still in her uniform from the night before. Truett was asleep on the couch, tablet beside him, half a line of code left unfinished on the screen. He had fallen asleep debugging his own mini operating system. Again. The TV played low in the background. A local news anchor was wrapping up a segment about Halcyon's historic launch, calling it seamless and flawless. Not one word about what really happened. Odessa didn't expect them to give credit, but she also hadn't expected them to erase it. She picked up her phone and played the second voicemail. It was Verna Cully. Ms. Brinkley, I hope this message finds you well. We're moving forward on our offer for Truett. If you could come in today, we'd like to discuss how to formalize it. The voice was friendly, polished, but it didn't sit right. Later that afternoon, Odessa and Truett sat in the HR conference room across from Verna and a young man in glasses who introduced himself as Nathan Royce, Halcyon's internal legal counsel. We've drafted a non-disclosure agreement, Nathan said, sliding a packet of papers across the table. It's standard, just to make sure no sensitive information is shared outside the company. Odessa didn't pick it up. So, you're asking him to sign something that says he can't talk about what happened? It's routine, Verna cut in. It protects everyone involved. He's 10, Odessa said. Nathan offered a corporate smile. We understand that. You'd be signing on his behalf. What happens if we don't? She asked. Verna's expression didn't change, but her tone cooled. Then we'll have to reevaluate what we're able to offer. Truett's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest of his chair. He looked uncomfortable now, not because of the tension, but because he understood what was being asked. They want me to forget I helped, he said softly. No, sweetheart, Odessa said gently. They want everyone else to forget you helped. Nathan straightened his tie. Ms. Brinkley, we're not trying to diminish anything. This could open doors for Truett, big ones. We're offering him a real path into this industry, one most kids his age never get. At the price of silence? Odessa asked. Verna sighed. With all due respect, this isn't about hiding the truth. It's about managing perception. And how's that worked out for you so far? Odessa asked, her voice steady. Truett stood up. I don't need the deal. Everyone looked at him. I already know how to build things, he said. I don't need permission. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but Verna raised a hand. Wait, she said. Truett, are you saying you don't want to work with Halcyon? I'm saying, he replied, I don't want to be used by Halcyon. Silence. Even Odessa looked at him, surprised by the strength in his tone. Verna folded her hands. We're not trying to exploit you. We're offering something special. Odessa finally reached for the NDA and flipped through it. There's nothing in here about tutoring, or curriculum, or mentorship. It's all about liability. Control. She closed it. I think we're done here. Verna gave a small nod. That's your choice. But this is a one-time offer. Odessa stood. Then you should have made it with two hands, not one holding a gag order. They walked out together. Nobody stopped them. Back in the car, Truett buckled in and sat quietly for a minute before he spoke. You mad? She looked over at him. No, I'm proud. They're not going to help me now. You don't need help from people who want to hide you, she said. You've already helped them, and they know it. But down the street, in a small co-working space, someone had just read a leaked thread about the launch, and they weren't going to let the truth disappear. By the end of the week, the name Truett Brinkley had started to show up in places Odessa never imagined. Reddit threads, obscure tech forums, even a few anonymous LinkedIn posts from people who witnessed the launch hiccup firsthand. The full story hadn't broken yet, but it was leaking, bit by bit. Someone uploaded a blurry cell phone video taken through the glass of Halcyon's control room. You couldn't see Truett's face, but you could hear his voice, young, calm, explaining the memory loop error while grown engineers leaned in like students. The video went viral on 2 dev subreddits in under 12 hours. By Sunday night, a small tech blog out of Flagstaff posted an article, Who Really Saved Halcyon's Launch? And by Monday morning, Odessa's inbox had changed. No more cold legal language, no more vague follow-ups. Now it was journalists, podcast producers, college outreach coordinators. 2 independent developers offered to send Truett custom hardware just to see what he'd build with it. Odessa sat across from her son at their little kitchen table, scrolling through one of the emails. Truett was focused on something else, an old motherboard he'd scavenged from a donation box last year. He was halfway through resoldering the USB input. You want to read these? She asked. I saw a few, he mumbled. I don't think I'm ready to talk to people like that. You don't have to. I just want to work on my stuff. She smiled, gently brushing a flake of solder off the table. Then that's what you'll do. Later that afternoon, they went for a walk down East Lemon Street, just to stretch their legs. It was quiet. Desert breeze, a few birds on power lines. The same streets Odessa had swept clean on her night shifts now felt different, like they might actually lead somewhere. Halfway down the block, a woman called out from a small co-working space tucked between a bookstore and a vegan taco stand. Hey, are you Truett? They turned. Odessa stepped slightly in front of her son before responding. Who's asking? I'm Rena Duke, the woman said, stepping forward and offering her hand. I run the local branch of Bright Circuits. We mentor youth coders, middle school through college. We read about your son. One of our members posted his story. We'd love to have him stop by. Odessa narrowed her eyes. This isn't some kind of show, is it? No cameras, no PR, Rena promised. Just smart kids and good equipment. He'll be in charge of what he wants to do. Truett peeked from behind his mom. You have real gear? Rena grinned. We've got Raspberry Pi clusters, open source hardware, broken robots that need fixing, and one 3D printer that only works when it feels like it." That got a smile out of him. They visited that same day. The space was small but alive. No marble floors, no glass doors, just whiteboards full of ideas, half-built drones, and tables covered in wires and half-eaten pretzels. Truett blended in fast. By the end of the hour, he was helping a high school sophomore troubleshoot a logic error in a self-watering garden bot. Odessa sat on a bench near the window, watching through the glass. No one stared at him like he didn't belong. No one handed her forms or whispered about NDAs. They just let him be who he already was. When they walked home that evening, Truett was quiet for a while, like his brain was still spinning. Then he asked, "Do you think I can do something real someday?" She looked down at him. "Baby, you already did." But the world hadn't seen the last of Truett Brinkley, because while one company tried to bury his moment, another one had just lit the path forward. By the end of the month, Truett had found a rhythm. He'd spend afternoons at Bright Circuits helping older students write cleaner code, then come home and work on his own projects. Things nobody asked for, things nobody funded, but things that made him excited to wake up each day. Odessa kept her cleaning job, not because she had to, but because she liked the normalcy. She liked knowing exactly where her keys were and which hallways still needed buffing. And she liked the quiet way some of the Halcyon employees started greeting her differently now. Not in a flashy, fake smile kind of way, but with a respect she hadn't seen before. It wasn't lost on her that it took her son being a genius to get that kind of recognition. One night, while washing dishes, Odessa asked him, "Are you glad you didn't take their offer?" Truett nodded without looking up from his laptop. "They didn't want me. They wanted to own what I did." She dried her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "You know, not every open door is the right one." "I figured that out," he said. Then, after a beat, "Sometimes you gotta build your own." There was pride in his voice, not arrogance. Just the quiet kind that came from knowing what he was worth and not letting someone else write the story for him. Weeks later, Odessa received a letter from a charter school in Flagstaff. Someone from Bright Circuits had recommended Truett for an accelerated STEM program. It wasn't polished or prestigious, but it was hands-on, collaborative, and, most importantly, honest. Truett read the brochure twice. "Think they'll let me bring my own code base?" "You can ask," Odessa said. "Worst they can do is say no." He grinned. "Then I'll write a better one." Halcyon never did go public with the full story of what happened that launch day. They released a polished documentary 6 months later, complete with fast cuts, dramatic music, and interviews from top engineers praising team synergy and recovery under pressure. Truett wasn't mentioned, not once. But that didn't bother him anymore, because the people who mattered did know. The forums that started tagging him in discussions, the college students sending him DMs asking how he learned system architecture at age 10. The teacher who offered to mail him an old server rack just for practice. And the kids at Bright Circuits, who now listened a little harder when he spoke. Odessa once told him, "The world's gonna wanna own your gifts. Make sure you never sell the parts they didn't help build." He didn't always understand what she meant, but he never forgot it. It wasn't about fame, or headlines, or even validation. It was about knowing your worth, even when others don't. And the truth? Not every hero wears a badge. Not every genius walks in with a laptop bag and a title. Sometimes he's just a kid in a hand-me-down t-shirt walking into a broken system with a quiet voice, and the answer no one else could see. So the next time someone tells you that greatness only comes with a degree, a title, or a certain kind of name, think about Truett Brinkley. And remember what's possible when someone refuses to wait for permission. If you felt something in this story, share it. And don't forget to subscribe. Someone out there needs to hear it today.